Welcome to Charity Champions, the podcast where we celebrate the people driving real change across the charity and not-for-profit world. I'm your host, Emily Formby from Charity Recruit. Today, I'm joined by Michelle Baharier, a long-standing advocate for disability rights, inclusion and equality, and someone with a huge amount of lived and leadership experience in the sector. Michelle founded a charity from nothing and ran it for 25 years, with 13 of those as a volunteer, growing it into an organisation with 24 staff supporting around 3,000 people each year and receiving national recognition along the way. Alongside her work in the sector, Michelle is also an artist, with her work exploring the themes of barriers, boundaries and inclusion, which really reflects the thread that runs throughout her career. So welcome, Michelle. It's brilliant to have you on Charity Champions.
Hi. Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
I'd love to start right at the beginning. You know, looking back all those years ago, what first inspired you to set up your charity?
Well, what inspired me to set up to my charity was my own disability.
Okay.
And I've got lived experience of mental health, and mental health provision is not very good in
Right.
terms of thinking about how do we enable people to stay well.
Yes.
So not to be sick, but to stay well. And I suppose I'm fortunate that I'm an artist as well. And
Mm-hmm.
and in a way that was problematic because at that time mental health services thought they'd give you a bit of sugar paper, and if you'd been to art school then you could draw and you'd be all right. But also you got sent to these places where you could have a cup of tea, moan and smoke,
Right.
and so you're almost kept in this bubble
I
of
see.
depression, and I'm not sure most people really understand how severe clinical depression is,
Mm.
or anxiety, because there's a real difference between waking up in the morning and feeling a bit depressed and having clinical depression. and
Right.
and I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder as well, which kind of, you know, it's a complex thing. It's never one thing.
Mm.
Anyway, and the provision for us was awful. And also at the time, I hung out in a lot of squatted venues. So it was a
Right.
very different era. You
Mm.
know, the 80s and the 90s were very, very different. They were quite bleak because you
Right.
had care in the community where a lot of the asylums were closing their doors and putting people into the community. So you had some people with who'd lived in institutions most of their lives roaming the streets,
Right.
and quite a lot of them would end up in our squat. Um,
Okay.
and our squat comprised of an art gallery, a rave in the
Oh, wow.
evening. We rented our space to whoever wanted to rent it. So the Green Party owned the computer and the printer, but we would use them because that was their rent to us
Really?
for staying in the squat. And and we'd run life drawing classes and we'd run yoga. We'd have a cafe that had really cheap food, but it had to be vegetarian. It had to be properly prepared food. It can be
Yeah.
some sort of boil in the bag. Um, we did everything and anything. We let local
Wow.
people use the venue to have meetings. Um, and I think, what has got lost in our society completely is the ability to have an open social secular space. And I say secular because you need to get rid of religion, and a lot of things become separate spaces when they become religious. And
Right.
and the great thing about squats is they really were inclusive to anyone who rocked up.
I
Anyone who
see.
rocked up and wanted to get involved could get involved.
So
And
going back to that time where you were in and around that environment, not feeling great yourself, where did that idea come from that you needed to change this, and how did you get the confidence to sort of put the wheels in motion?
well, it's quite a long-winded story. So the squat got we actually got a mortgage from a bank,
Oh,
and we
right.
could have bought a building on Cold Harbour Lane in Brixton, which
Right.
was the old Dole office.
Mm.
However, it got sold to the Voice newspaper, who then let a Grade 1 listed building fall down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, absolutely disgraceful.
Mm.
Um, and now it's horrible modern flats. But anyway, um, so we got evicted. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a space or anything to do, and a whole group of us decided that actually what we did kept us well,
Right. So
because
this was
we
just a group of friends doing these art classes and getting together rather than it being anything official at this point.
yeah, but
Right.
also we all had a disability,
Yeah.
so we were all very excluded, because in the 80s and 90s there were no computers, there was no, oh, we can make reasonable adjustments or any of that.
Yes.
It
Mm.
wasn't a viable thing. So we decided we'd set up a charity.
Right.
So we didn't really know what setting up a charity meant. We just thought we'd get a bit of paper and run a charity. So the first hurdle was doing that. And because we'd all been squatters, we all had to go and be personally interviewed by the Charities Commission.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And at that time, there was a guy somewhere in North London, a really nice solicitor guy who worked with art groups and helped them get charitable status. And he said
Right.
he'd never seen this kind of thing happen ever before.
That's
But
amazing.
anyway, that's what happened to us. We had to
Wow.
go and be interviewed by the Charities Commission individually.
That must
So
have been
we
so intimidating. How, it from that environment going into the charity commission individually as well, not collectively. That must have
yeah.
been so emotionally draining.
Well, we all brought suits from charity shops
Oh,
so that we were
really?
well presented. Yeah,
Right.
because I've always had pink hair and blue hair and things like that. So back in the early 90s, it wasn't an acceptable thing,
Right.
so we all had to smart up, I call it. And we were lucky because, like, I did therapeutic earnings and taught on a foundation course in
Right.
Brixton. I taught art history and drawing, and so we did have the backing of the um, college to
Right.
set up the charity. We didn't have a space at this time. We didn't have anything else. So we did that, and then we thought we'd get a grant,
Oh, right.
and that took a lot longer than we thought. And while we were squatting, we had what was then London Arts Board, which is the equivalent to the Arts Council. So we had some grants, and I actually got very lucky and sent to America a few times
Oh,
to talk
really?
about, yeah, partly to talk about art that was censored, because a lot of my
Mm.
work has been censored, and it's not, and it was because the work talked about homelessness.
Really?
Homelessness, and it was actually with the big issue. So I had a piece of work in this exhibition at St Martin's in the Field, and I got there and it had been removed.
Oh, wow.
Um, and there was a woman from the Arts Council there, and as luck would have it, she sent me to Texas because of that censorship. But ironically, that same piece of art won a prize with NatWest Housing.
At the same time, or was that years later?
No, the same time.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
ironic how the big issue, who you think would promote this, didn't.
Absolutely.
But
Mm.
NatWest Banks had no problem with the same
Mm.
piece of work,
Well,
because
why do you think that was?
I think it's because the big issue were worried about their funders,
Okay.
and to actually show a policeman blocking people from entering a building, because squatting was really the brakes on for homelessness. So the fact that people could squat empty flats. I mean, I squatted a flat for 7 years,
Really?
the same flat. It was a council flat, because the councils used to leave flats empty because then they didn't have to pay money to the government.
Wow.
And squatting, London's always been expensive. It's not
Mm.
expensive now, it's always been. And there's
Yeah.
never been enough social housing.
Right.
And so squatting picked up lots of that. Instead of having people in tents on the street that we have
Hmm.
now, lots of
Hmm.
people like me lived in squats. It
Right.
wasn't good for your health in lots of ways because there was no permanence, there's no reassurance that you'd come home and find your home,
Right. I'm with you.
so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
very, very disturbing. Um,
So
but
just
it was
so,
a safety net.
right.
So yeah, my coming at this is very DIY
Yeah.
and made
Absolutely.
up along the way. We didn't go off and read strategy books. We
No.
didn't have a finance or a banking background. And
Mm.
also we were all very working class.
Mm. What do you think made it possible to grow from where you were then, effectively nothing, to an organisation of the scale that you got to?
The fact we had nothing else to do.
Really?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that really annoys me is people really criticize people when they're on benefits, and the benefit system, the way it's organized, doesn't allow people to grow. Like we were allowed, we could get things like enterprise allowance.
Hmm.
So we had a year where we could earn some money and get some
Okay.
business support. And it was completely rubbish because it was a benefits course and it
Right.
didn't do what you needed help with,
Okay.
actually. It
What did
might
you
be,
need help with it at that time?
well, at that time, we needed things to know about, what is a structure,
Mm.
and it's like none of us were paid. We all just did this voluntarily,
Mm.
so we went off and we set up groups with schools and we worked with schools and we worked in libraries. Um, and then eventually we rented a railway arch because it was only £300 a month and it was
Oh, really?
huge.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
But, to do that now in this time,
Yeah.
sort of 30 years on, to rent a railway arch like that, you would need £50,000.
Wow.
So you couldn't even think about setting up what we set up.
No,
£300 a month, 3,000. I think it was less than that because it was £3,000 for the year.
really.
So it was kind of not very much money. It
Mm.
wasn't the best venue in the world, but it wasn't unaffordable. So you could try things out. And so we had that space and we managed to start working with the groups that we were supposed to be a part of, bringing them to our railway art. And we started off with a women's only group and we used Artemisia Gentileschi as our icon
Oh,
because
right.
she's a very famous artist
Uh-huh.
who's alongside Caravaggio, but she'd been through a rape
Right.
and her father had stood by her. So she represented a lot of the people we worked with
Right.
and enabled us to talk about that in a very safe way.
Mm.
Um, so we started with that, and then we were sort of muddling along, and there was nobody really who wanted to particularly help us or anything else. And then I saw this, and we got a few Arts Council grants
Mm.
here and there, and we got a few other grants, and but they were all really small. They were
Mm.
like a couple of £100 here, a couple of £100 there. You can't really do
I
much
see.
with that.
No.
And then I got an unlimited. Then 2000 hit, and there was Millennium money, and actually
Right.
National Mind gave us some money,
Right.
which was from a pot of money called Unlimited.
Right.
And from Unlimited, we found out about the School of Social Entrepreneurs.
Oh, okay.
And I
And how
managed
did
to,
that change things then? What did you get from the School of Entrepreneurs?
well, what I got from the School of Entrepreneurs was a load of contacts.
Right.
And I
Okay.
met people and I did networking because in the charity sector, if you're not networked,
Mm.
then forget it,
Right.
actually, because and especially if you're from a working class background and you don't have much money,
Hmm.
then you're in a limited space,
Yes.
and class in this country is never really talked about. It's not
Right.
on any ticket. It's only suddenly, I think, in the last 5 years, been on an Arts Council form.
Oh, right.
And it's absolutely disgusting. In schools, when they measure people's success, they never ask about class.
Right. Okay.
So we don't know if people of who consider themselves to be a certain class feel excluded because they're not
Mm.
measured. There's no measurement looking at that. And, I was very lucky. When I went to art college, I got a full grant.
Right.
I did an MA for 2 years. I got a full grant. I didn't
Right.
leave in debt,
Yeah.
having, and the whole thing about leaving college in debt means that you're just going to trigger mental health.
Yes.
If
It's
people wonder why there's so much mental health, it's because all sorts of things like financial issues are the highest issue of why somebody would take their life,
right.
because they can't deal with the debt. If they end up in huge amounts of debt, then how do they deal with that?
Mm. Mm.
And it isn't addressed, and it's appalling. And and running a mental health organization, you see that all the time.
Mm.
But anyway, so we
So going back
found,
to that sort of funding piece, and that
yeah.
networking sort of side of things, how did the two go hand in hand? What happened with your, from a financial point of view, when you started putting the time and effort into that networking piece?
Well, it wasn't just a networking piece, it was also how to write a funding bid.
Right. Okay.
How to write a funding bid to a trust or foundation.
So you were getting
But
advice and guidance from the network about that.
I was getting physical help to write them.
I see.
I've got dyslexia. I'm severely dyslexic.
Hmm.
It's like, and also, why does somebody give you money? And I learned that the main reason why someone gives you money is it makes them smile.
Right. Okay.
And to me, if you think about that, and it's like, if somebody says they only give money to pigeons, don't write to them, because they've told you they only give money to pigeons, so it's a waste of your time. So,
Right.
which means you have to spend a hell of a lot of time doing research.
Right.
And even when people say they give to people with mental health, it doesn't mean they give to people with lived experience.
Right. I
It
see.
also doesn't mean that people trust, when you've got not only a class background but lived experience,
Mm.
that still carries a lot of stigma
Mm.
for people, because do they trust you? And you've come from a squatting background, and you've come from this. You know, what they don't actually see is, a hell of a lot more than they do about what
Mm.
keeps people well.
Mm.
And
Uh,
and that Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, how did that shape the way that you've built and led the charity then, do you think?
Well, it meant we had to challenge a lot of barriers that people have,
Yeah.
and a lot of barriers people have about disabled people. Um,
How do you go
because,
about that challenge?
well, it's hard. You just have to be yourself,
Yeah.
and you have to make it quite clear to people when they talk to you that you're actually one of the people you're helping. But that has a double whammy in it when you run an organization, because people don't necessarily understand that sometimes when you're working with somebody who maybe is at risk of becoming homeless or is homeless, that you've been there. And the problem is that can be very triggering and very hard for staff. And that is something that we didn't get right,
Okay. And what do you
because,
mean by that?
well, for instance, when the government brought in bedroom tax, and let's call it what it is, bedroom tax, a number of our attendees took their own lives.
Oh, really?
Yes, because the minute, and this is what I said, finance is the biggest reason people take their lives.
Right.
because they can't cope, and
Right.
nobody can help them unless somebody could pay that debt or
Yeah.
erase that debt. There isn't help, so and it builds up in people's head as no
Mm.
way out.
Mm.
And things like that exclude people, and people
Right.
become very insular. But the thing is, not only did it affect our participants who use the project, it affected our staff,
Right. Okay.
because a lot of people who work in are also on benefits,
Mm.
and there's a real misunderstanding about that. So when you have staff in the same position, it mirrors all the time, and it makes uncertainty for them. And one of our aims was to try and employ everyone who had issues themselves. And
Right.
then we tried to mix it up a bit, which was also hard, because
Mm.
people who don't see themselves as fitting into that category, they might do it under the equal ops or whatever, but sometimes they're not really part in it properly
Right.
either. So that was a really big challenge,
Mm.
for the whole organisation. Also, our board members were people who mainly used the charity. So
Mm.
when there were cuts and changes into the way, like I managed to set up a contract with a local psychiatric hospital where they would pay for people to come to use our project.
Right.
So we had an income, because
I
my
see.
mum had a toy stall on the market. So I do know about how business works, and
Yeah.
charity really is a really negative business model, in my opinion, especially because the way the board is all volunteers and a lot participants. And because it means when the hospital stopped that contract, a
Mm.
lot of them weren't entitled to what came next,
A
which
lot of
was
the users, you mean?
yeah. So they weren't entitled to personal budgets because they weren't ill enough.
Oh, really? Right.
The thing is, if they weren't with us doing something, they'd be
Mm.
hanging around on the street getting
Mm.
ill and going back into hospital. But
Right.
nobody will pay for people to stay well.
Mm.
And this is a really, this is the most difficult thing. You have things that work, and a lot of trusts and foundations, if they think something is something the government should pay for, they won't fund you either.
Right.
And
That's hard,
actually,
isn't it?
yeah, and going down that social enterprise model
Mm.
is incredibly difficult, because then you might have to spend more time selling your thing than you do
Yeah.
supporting the people your charity is set up to do. And you have to be, as a founder and everything else, you have to be very flexible, and you also have to be very imaginative, because also every time you get funding, funders want new innovation, all this. And actually, what you really need is money to fund your core staff,
To do what you're doing well.
to do what works.
Mm.
Because most people want a purpose in life. Most
Mm.
people want hope. Most people want some friends. You know, they're very basic, the
Yeah.
things most people need.
Hmm.
However, the way the funding and everything else is structured, if you're not Oxfam with 50 charity shops, you
Yeah.
haven't got an income stream. And there's an awful lot that just doesn't really add up, because it's, again, I think charity is very based in a class model,
Right.
and it's very the structure isn't properly thought about, or the how a CEO manages a board and manages their staff. They're like piggy
Mm.
in the middle.
Well, I was just going to say, picking up on that point about the lived experience of your employees and the board, and then sort of bringing people in who didn't necessarily have that lived experience. What was the right balance for your organisation in the end? You sort of alluded to the fact that you try to different options. What was
Mm.
optimum for the organisation in the end?
I think it would have been to keep it smaller,
Oh, really?
actually, and not to have grown it.
Right. Do you mean in terms of the board or
No,
in terms of the
in
whole thing?
terms of the whole thing,
Oh,
because
right.
then it would have been less stressful,
I see.
because our rent, we're in London, our rent was
Mm.
£76,000 a year. The
Wow.
idea that people give you a free building and all this, if you're a charity, is just nonsense.
No, no.
And when you've got to raise £76,000 a year to pay the rent, plus you've got 24 staff,
Mm.
plus you've got a board. We weren't Oxfam. We
No.
didn't have a whole board of directors. And what isn't given to people really is that whether you run a charity that helps 10 people or 10,000 people, you've actually got the same business structure that you've got to follow.
Mm.
You've got to do your accounts, you've got to do your insurance, you've got to have, everything in the same way a big company does. And it's
Mm.
ridiculous.
It's
Actually,
hard. It's really tricky, isn't it?
it is really tricky, yeah. And there's no proper infrastructure to support what you're doing. And I think just running a normal business is easier.
How did you find that then on your own mental health and well-being? Talk us through that sort of work-life balance. I can imagine it becoming
Yeah.
all-consuming. You started this as very much a passion project, and it grew and grew and grew. Talk us through how that worked for you.
Well, how it worked for me, it was fine in the beginning, and it was fine when I first started. I didn't get paid for 13 years.
That's
So
incredible.
I managed people
Mm.
unpaid, and
Mm.
most of those people probably had no clue.
Oh, really? Were
Yeah,
they being paid?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, because it's very hard to get funding to pay staff,
Yeah, yeah.
actually, and
Mm.
especially if it's core staff. Somebody will give you project money, and
Mm.
although you might say, well, I need this much for administrative costs,
Mm.
a lot of time, and that's again really stupid. No
Mm.
project can happen if there isn't the backup.
No.
So it's totally ridiculous. And funders need to really, if they really want to fund charities and see good work, then they really need to think, well, actually, as long as we fund the core,
Yeah.
those people know what works, leave them to it.
Mm.
But anyway, so by the time I was employing 24 people, I felt incredibly responsible for people, because
Yeah, I
not
bet.
only are you employing them, but that pays their rent, that puts food on their table, etc. So
Yeah.
you feel quite, and it's really hard. You've had 3-year funding from, say, the big lottery, but then you don't get any more funding. Then you lose those staff who were
Mm.
paid for out of that grant. Now, some people don't want to understand that that's because a grant's finished. They think
Sorry,
it's
I just
because
missed that last bit. What did you say? Because of a grant?
a grant ending.
Oh,
So
right.
they
Okay.
then see it as you've got a high turnover of staff.
Right. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. So it looks as though you've got that churn in the organisation because people are coming on and then leaving, but the reality is the
They're
funding's
not
ended for that.
leaving.
Yeah.
And it was their contract has ended, and their contract was only for that grant.
Right.
And that is really problematic, because then you've got people, and also you've got people who've built up relationships with people who use the project,
Mm.
but
Yes.
also you've then got the whole headache of capacity and keeping that capacity running within the organization,
Mm.
and you then lose, if you've had to train that person, you lose all those skills, you lose all that knowledge, and off they go. And they often leave before the contract ends because they need to get another
They need to
job.
get something else,
But
don't they?
you can't reapply to that funder until 6 months before the end, because that's the rules of that funder.
Yeah. So it
So
becomes a
this,
vicious circle then, doesn't it?
yeah, and it becomes all consuming
Mm,
because you lie awake at night thinking, how are you going to keep this going? Or at least I did, because I
mm,
was very protective,
mm.
if you like. So I kept working 24/7, and that was wrong. And
Yeah,
also the board, again, because the board are all volunteers, they don't have an obligation to go and do anything for you.
right.
And the problem is, quite often some board members get very blah, blah, blah. I remember I had a finance person from a bank, and it was like he gave he didn't really understand. He wasn't working in his big bank. We were a tiny charity,
Yeah,
and he was there and wanted to do good. But he designed us a claims form that I could have claimed my aeroplane journeys on, you know, and he hadn't stepped back. He couldn't step back from his big organization. And
right.
I think that's really problematic where they can't step back and actually see you're the CEO, you're also the financial director, you're also the operations director. You're also ending up doing half the bookkeeping and accounts
Yeah,
because you might only have an admin person 2.5 days a week.
right.
So they can only do so much, and they might be doing all the registrations and all the, doing actually things that are a little bit beyond most admin people's role.
Mm,
Um, and also, I think modern work no longer, people are no longer backed up by an admin person. So in big organizations, nobody used to do their own admin.
right.
They would have somebody who did their admin.
Mm,
That would usually be their secretary.
yeah.
Now we don't have that because we've got computers. So a whole level of staff have actually disappeared.
Mm,
And when you're someone like me with a disability like dyslexia, you
mm,
know, I need somebody who organizes me.
yes.
That's
Mm,
that should be my access to work, is
mm,
an organizer person,
mm,
plus somebody who goes through everything I write and not only proofreads it, but actually puts it into English, you
right.
know,
Okay.
because I don't write in that way. I write in
Mm,
bullet points and things.
mm,
And although that proved useful for fundraising, for a whole number of reasons, but so I was very successful at fundraising. Otherwise,
mm.
we wouldn't have grown. But the ideas, we did the first ever social prescribing. We actually did test runs for social prescribing.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
How
we
did
were
that
the
come about?
well, because we wanted to think about how people stay well. But the
Right.
problem is, if you have social prescribing, you can't expect it to be free.
Right.
And so we were paid for trials and they were very successful. But also we put in wellbeing advisors, which they now call social prescribers, but actually they're not doing their job in the way we set up the program
Right.
at all,
In what
you
way
know.
did you set it up then?
So we set it up that people would meet with a wellbeing advisor first of all, because we know a lot of people's issues are going to be to do with finance.
Yeah.
So the first issue somebody will probably have will be a financial problem, and that's why they're depressed, and that's
Right.
why they might be suicidal. So although they can be having mental health counselling or whatever, that doesn't address issues like benefits or debt
Yes.
or any of that, because a counsellor is a counsellor about your emotional process or your trauma. They're not there to
Yes.
give you
Not looking at the
advice.
practicalities of why you're in that position.
Yeah, and actually, you could probably use a lot less medication and a lot less therapists if you had practical support. But when
Mm.
you think all the CABs are closed, most of the traditional ways, there's no longer legal aid. So most
Right.
people can't get readdressed by court. Most people have no access to legal support whatsoever,
No.
and having grown up before Margaret Thatcher, I've seen the whole dissipation of support that
Yes.
people had access to. So now we're much more in a wide jungle. So the well-being advisors would work with people to get support around whatever it was and
So
find ways.
what did you do for your own mental health and well-being at that stage where, you said that you were lying awake at night worrying about the problems within the organization? How
Mm,
did you look after yourself at that time?
well, the problem was I didn't.
Right. And how did that
Um,
manifest itself in the end?
well, it meant I got burnt out, but I also
Right.
got treated really badly by my board of trustees.
Right.
And that is really common. I was at the School of Social Entrepreneurs, and I know lots of women, not men, who what happened to me happened to them as
Right.
well with their organisations. And people think it's easy to run an organisation, so they don't understand what you're doing, so
Mm.
they decide to make accusations or they'll find ways to push you out. And in my case, the charity got robbed
Oh,
and got
wow.
lynched. And the people who did it have done it to another charity, but the charities commission don't get involved.
Right.
You
So
know, they
you,
they paid a guy £78,000 to sack me of the
wow.
charity money, and the charities commission did nothing. And you know, at the time, it just made me suicidal. I had a
Oh, how
community
awful.
treat, I had a home treatment team coming around
Right.
my house. It was really bad because there's
Mm.
me struggling to raise money
Mm.
to make sure, like I said, our rent was
Mm.
6 grand a year.
Mm.
So I had to raise that before we paid staff.
Mm.
And, I wasn't on a very high salary. I don't have a pension
Mm.
because to me, I didn't properly put in boundaries,
Right.
to say, this is work, this is what I do. And I suppose growing up in a family where people ran their own businesses,
Mm.
my granddad had a toy store, my mum had a toy store on the market, it's basic income and expenditure, isn't it?
Yes.
And if you
Yeah.
don't make a profit, because you have to make, and in a charity, it's a surplus, you
Mm.
have to make a surplus in order to keep your house in order, that you've
Mm.
got reserves in case you don't get funds.
Yes.
And lots of people, they've no clue, they don't understand that. So they think if you've got some reserves in the bank, oh, they can just blow it, you know,
Yeah.
and
And
all
that's
sorts of stuff like that. And it's a difficult juggle.
mm. So you're utilizing your experience now in your mentoring capacity, aren't you? I know when we spoke on the
Mm.
phone, you are a mentor to a number of small charity CEOs. Talk us through, that process. What advice do you give them when you start out on a mentoring journey?
Well, when I start out on a mentoring journey, I look at somebody's work-life balance
Right.
first, because if somebody's not taking care of their health, they'll get
Mm.
burnt out. And
Yeah.
also, it needs to be realistic in terms of what happens when you're not there.
Right.
So somebody should always have a kind of succession thing in their head that they won't always be there. And
Right.
I think, and in order to think about what's reasonable, and so that's really important. And then look at what goals people want to achieve, and
Personal
or
goals or organizational
a
goals?
mix,
Right.
a mix of organization and personal, because I like to start at the top of the ladder
Mm-hmm.
and then work out what are the steps that need putting in place to achieve that, and
Yes.
look at realistic
Mm-hmm.
and back burner and pie in the
Right.
sky, because we should always be ambitious,
Yeah.
but I think you always want to start with quick wins.
Right.
You want to see results for yourself, for your organization. So starting with those really achievable goals in the first place. And having a real, I always start with a box. I have 4 things in my box. I have things that are urgent and only I can do. And
Right,
then I have things that are back burner and nice to have. Then I have things that are urgent but somebody else can do and I can delegate.
right.
And then I have sort of housekeeping
I see.
that
So
I have to
is that a
do.
strategy that you're recommending to your mentees then that they
Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah. That
how well received is that? What's the feedback you've had?
people like it because I think quite often people don't think about what they can delegate that's urgent.
Right.
Urgent things are still not all done by you. And delegating is a really important skill,
Mm.
actually,
It's
that you're not the only one carrying this stuff.
I suppose that must be difficult when you are a founding CEO because it's your baby, isn't it? It's your project. You've started it from scratch and you're passionate about it. I guess that's perhaps where those lines become difficult to delegate because once,
Totally.
Mm. And
Yeah.
I suppose that comes to having the right trust in the team members that you've got.
And also investing in the team members. And as I've said, that's quite difficult because of funding
Yeah.
streams. So if you've only got funding for someone for 3 years, and how do you do that? And you do have to think about, well, actually there is a value in someone leaving and going somewhere else, because also they'll talk about where they started
Mm.
and they'll take that knowledge with them,
Yes.
but um it's quite a tough one, and people come with different issues. Some people I've worked with, because they've founded the organization, they've put their savings into the organization,
Right.
and discussing with someone whether that's a sustainable model or not,
Mm.
and
That's a
is that
difficult conversation, isn't it?
it's a very difficult conversation. And also it means if anything then happens to their organization, they've invested everything, and
Yeah.
financially, not just time, but their finances, which they might need later on in life. And you know, getting people to think, is that really the route they want to go down, or do they need another strategy into the way they run their charity?
You're
But
asking somebody to be really honest there, aren't you? And really truthful around the position of the organisation to, make sure that they're utilising the funds that they've got right.
and a lot of founders, do work for nothing, and they might start off being the chair of the board, so they can't get paid anyway without
Right.
charities
Yeah.
commission
Mm.
consent. So there's those issues. How does somebody transition into a paid position
Mm.
as well, and where do you get the funding from that? And especially if someone's got a disability and
Yeah.
they're doing that, because you've always got to make sure that somebody can pay their rent,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
they're earning within thresholds for what's it called, universal credit.
Right.
Because like I said before, a lot of people don't quite understand that universal credit pays a lot of people who are actually in work, but because
Yes.
they earn so little,
Mm.
universal credit tops that up, and all of
Yeah.
that is a nightmare organisationally because of the paperwork it kind of puts in place. But getting people to think about where they want to be. Do they always want to be a volunteer within that organisation? Have they
Mm.
got another job? Is
Mm.
there then they're nice to have kind of
Mm.
thing? And it's really important people don't, I don't know if I would have done it if I knew what was involved.
Oh,
Bec-
really?
well, it was I mean, I was in a position where, because of my disability, I was medically retired out of work.
Right.
And I was only about 28 or 30 or something like that.
Mm.
So I was medically retired, so it was kind of
Wow.
like ridiculous,
Mm.
and there wasn't um And that's what I mean. And it's even worse now. There weren't educational courses to support. Well, what do you do? And
Yes.
actually, with AI coming, what are people going to do?
Mm.
And what government is actually going to address that? But
I
we
think
don't
that's
talk
the
about that in
podcast all on
mentoring.
itself.
It is. But kind of, so when working with people, finding out what are their priorities in their life as well,
Mm.
not just their charitable work they're setting up, and also what business model,
Right.
whether they choose an old-fashioned charity or whether they choose one of the CIC type models where you can be a
Yeah.
charity and a company.
Mm.
And because you've got to be able to weigh up who's giving you money,
Yes.
and certain organizations don't give you money if you're not a charity.
Yeah.
So that is always going to be a bit of a golden star in that way, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you know, and how you prepare all those accounts and how you bring on things like patrons. How do you
Right.
get your charity recognised? Because it's one thing to run a charity, it's another thing for people to actually invest in giving you money,
Yes.
and I think for some people, they'll look at a charity, will say 96 pence of your donation will go to the whatever it is the charity
Yeah.
does. But, when you look at really big charities, they have even bigger expenses, and their CEOs and their directors do get paid huge amounts of money,
Mm.
and the problem with that is how much does actually go to what people
Yeah, back
do.
into the service delivery.
Yeah, and getting people to think about how they show that value, you know,
Right.
like
Mm.
1 minute it's evaluation and monitoring, and the next minute it's theory of change, and then the next minute it'll be another buzzword. But also,
Right.
how does somebody keep up with the buzzwords?
Mm.
Because if you're not using the right buzzwords for the right people, you won't get.
You won't get the funding
And
necessarily.
that's really sad,
Mm.
because it's like quite a lot of people setting up small charities have no training in writing a fundraising bid or anything like this. They're doing really good work with their local
Mm.
community, very grassroots, and actually sometimes the amount of paperwork, you know, like I would also talk to somebody about what's the amount of paperwork they can cope with doing. Because somebody might give you £500 and want the same paperwork that somebody who gives you
That's
300 grand
interesting.
wants,
Yeah, that's
you
interesting,
know?
isn't it? Yeah.
And it's because they're more bothered about where their money goes, whereas the
Mm.
other organisation that gives you a huge amount actually gets that if they bog you down with too much monitoring and evaluation and all of that, then you're not actually going to deliver the project.
Yeah. No, I understand. Well, I
So,
think that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? Back to that networking piece, having the right people around you that can offer the right support, where you can go to for advice and guidance on,
mm,
that sort of thing. Well, Michelle, I think that brings us really to the end of our recording this morning, but it's been absolutely brilliant to hear your insights, and I really appreciate you sharing so openly with us on the podcast. I think it's so important to have honest conversations across the sector, and so hopefully people listening will have really resonated with some of the
mm.
topics that we've discussed today. So thank you to you for participating, and obviously thanks to the listeners as well. If you've enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and share. It really helps us to continue to get great sector voices talking with us on the podcast. So, Michelle, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we leave?
Yeah, just if anyone's interested in mentoring or anything, do get in touch.
What's the best
And
way for them to do that?
probably via an email or via a text message if you let people have my details.
We'll pop
That's the best
the
way.
link to your website
Yeah.
on the show material at the end of the podcast. So
Yeah.
yeah, we'll definitely get all that across.
Or you could do Instagram, but on Instagram and on my website, it shows my artwork, because my mentoring, I keep it kind of, I don't advertise it too much because I get quite a lot of call.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll
Because
work out.
I like working with people.
Good.
And helping them through problems that perhaps boards should be better equipped to do, but don't.
Right. Well, we'll get all the information for your contact details popped on the bottom of the show notes. But thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for listening. See you next time.